The Sri Lankan government is looking at achieving over 8% economic growth by 2016. Are we on the right track? Good governance? A question mark in the eyes of majority of the international community and even some businessmen here in Sri Lanka. To discuss all this and more, I have with me a very special guest. He is known to Newsfirst in Forcus for many years. The former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Chandra Jayaratne. A very good evening, sir, and welcome to Newsfirst in Focus as usual. Starting off, what is your opinion about the current development programs in Sri Lanka?
Well, the current development programs are well broadcast in terms of what it is supposed to deliver to people, but whether the people really have felt in their pockets, in their livelihoods, in their growth, what is offered or what is purported to be offered, and whether these will ever bring forth returns equivalent to what has been spent is very doubtful.
5 years following the end of the conflict, Mr. Jayaratne, you see a lot of developments in terms of infrastructure development. We see 2 highways being built, we see a port being built in Hambantota, we see an international airport being built in Hambantota as well. So there is significant amount of developments taking place in Sri Lanka. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I had the privilege of meeting a few, an economist, an analyst, and a political economist recently in an overseas visit. They had independently undertaken a visit to the development sites, and this was a summary of what they said in one voice. Sri Lanka has changed, and it's changing every time I come. Changing to a level that, you know, I'm perplexed as to what changes are taking place. But I wonder whether the government, the business sector, and the people are really seeing what those changes are. They just said they went to visited 4 institutions in the south: the port, the airport, the cricket stadium, and the newly being built administrative complex of the Hambantota. Now, he said the port was having the same number of 6 months ago they had visited the same development stage. Nothing has gone beyond. Airport, they said, was fantastic in every respect. There's supposed to be 52 people in employed. They didn't see more than 10 or 12, but all the counters, everything was not manned. No commercial flights taking place. They went to the cricket stadium, and they found a person or two just staying there. They said, "Are you playing matches?" They said, "Well, I don't know about matches. Some of our chairs also have been taken to Pallagalle." Then they had visited, before going to the news, they had visited the youth center, or this where the youth Commonwealth Youth thing was happening. There was a lone security guard who was sleeping, who said, "What can I do? Nothing happens here, so I sleep." Then they went to this new, spanking new, the best building they had seen anywhere outside of Colombo, they said, administrative complex, far away, closer to the jungles than the Hambantota town. And people were not coming because it was not convenient, no bus stations, nothing. So there was a big administrative complex, but nothing. So that, they said, fantastic change when you say the first impressions, but they said they worried so much about the debt and the return on investments.
Rome was not built in a day, Mr. Jayaratne. It took some time. Don't you think we are on the right track in terms of achieving
what you build must have some use to the Romans, and must allow the Romans to grow and be able to fend for themselves and fend off other people's competitive actions that's coming. If this infrastructure, most of them, let's take you were talking a while ago about the highways. The highways, does it serve any of our people? The poor people can't use it because buses are not allowed on it, trishaws are not allowed on it, motorcycles are not allowed on it, bicycles are not allowed on it. So they are still travelling the old way, and the buses are not recovering the cost, the fuel is being lost, people are not getting the benefits. So it's a few people. We all can go to Goa, we can go to for our breakfast, to our lunch, for a weekend. We can do that. The tourists.
What is going wrong?
I think what is going wrong is it's not being people focused. It is being focused on development for development's sake. Lots of egoistic things. And I think fundamentally, return on investment in cash flow terms, anything that you spend must bring a return. The return must come in terms of cash flows. The discounted future revenues must at least equal on a long term to the investment. Otherwise, and the cost benefits. If there are no cost benefits to a majority of the people, yes, you are talking about high growth. We are now going for a $6,000 per capita. What's the use of 6,000 or 10,000 if the distribution remains as it is? Last statistics show 54% of the income is shared by the top 20%. 4.4% is shared by the bottom 20%. Now, is this what what the general common people want? Maybe for you, me, and a few others. And to some of them much more than you and I are the beneficiaries. So I think that's not development. Development has to be democratic, must spread, must offer an equal chance to all. So to me, this development is not equitable, it is not in the long term sustainable, and fundamentally I think the truth of investment and its benefits have never been properly assessed.
Ms. Jonathan, you were talking about a people-focused development program, and that is what Sri Lanka needs at the moment. When you take a look at the last 2 to 3 years, you see many elections being held. We saw Southern Provincial Council election, we saw Western Provincial Council elections, now we are going to see Over Provincial Council elections. Now, the last 3 years, when you take a look at the elections, the government has recorded resounding victory. Why is this? If this is not the case, if this development program is not people focused, why would an individual go to the ballot box and cast their votes in favor of the government? What is the reason behind this?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of positive things they see about sovereignty, terrorism being served. There might have been a lot of other concerns, but to me, what is in it for their children and grandchildren? If the debt figures, as we see, you see the first 4 months mid-term report is out of the government. Again, you can see that our revenue is insufficient to pay just the debts and the debt servicing costs. The long term is even worse. If you take, I can bet you, any bottom dollar that I may have, that if you today take all the future earnings of this country from these investments, they are not sufficient to pay off the debt without new borrowed debt tomorrow. So that only means we are bankrupt.
In the long term, the government envisages to achieve over 8% economic growth, Mr. Jayaratan, that is by the year 2016. They want to make Sri Lanka the miracle of Asia. Are we on the right track to achieve growth?
I don't need to answer. I read a newspaper report quoted when I was overseas, which said some ministers or MPs had asked the Secretary to Finance if it's as rosy as he had presented in Beruala to them at a conference of government officials, why is it that people don't have drugs when they go to the hospitals? Why is education, the schools being closed, and people being told that they cannot afford to have 2 schools nearby? Why is it that people subsidies are not paid? Why is it that promised delivery of things that have been welfare? If there is such a great thing, why is it not? It's a good question to have been asked. Well, the answer that was given was also there, but I don't want to get into that. But that's a question that I think people are going to ask these questions much more into the future.
Mr. Jayaratan, I recollect in 2004 when the opposition leader of the country was the president, the current president, President Mahinda Rajapaksa, when he was the leader of the opposition, whenever there was a price increase, whenever the government led by the United National Party was going on the wrong track, there was so much of protest taking place in Sri Lanka against the then government. However, now we don't see that. Do you think it's a responsibility of the opposition to come into the forte or the fray and oppose issues like this?
I think the opposition has failed to hold the government to accountability as much as our business sector has, and our professionals have failed to hold the chambers and the professional organizations to you were talking about governance. I'll ask a few things. In this country there was a duopoly, I'm not going to name them, everybody will know. It became a monopoly recently, a 5 billion rupee transaction, and a duopoly becomes a monopoly. In any other country, there is called a Monopolies and Mergers Review. I haven't heard one gentleman asking, is this merger? It may be very good for the business, it may be very good for the stakeholder, but that must be reviewed. But was it reviewed? We had a monopoly in the port, then we had a duopoly, now we have an oligopoly of 3 partners, but the pricing structure, which was supposed to be guaranteed only for a 6-year period by an agreement, finished 8 years ago. No regulator, pricing remains the same, shippers are paying the same, importers, exporters are paying the same, so both imports are and exports growth is suffering. People are paying. Yes, of course people have learned to pay. There might be liquidity, but that doesn't mean that the efficiency of the port has gone up. If it has gone, then they are just not giving the benefits of the privatization to people. So if you go down this route of governance, there's a lot people can say. I mean, if you talk of the regulator recently talking about that independent directors should be like the third umpire in a cricket match. Now, when the independent directors are removed and the state participates through third parties to take independent directors on boards of banks out of their positions and put people who do not understand what banking and regulations are, that kind of interference is there.
Who are you pointing the finger at, Mr. Jayaratna?
I am pointing the finger at everybody. Firstly, the government must understand, I think, there is a state. The state is the nation. Now, the government today is saying opposite things to what the state has agreed. Where the state has signed up some agreements, they are sacrosanct. The government can't change it. When professionals have passed accounting standards and engineers have had standards of ethics to, and if they don't talk about the costs of projects and costs of materials being much higher because of corruption, that to me is accountability which is lacking. It's not only about war accountability. To me, there is more needs for accountability to be asked for by the stakeholders.
Now, taking a look at the current context, Mr. Jayaratna, interest rates are low in Sri Lanka, inflation is still on a single digit. When taking a look at the statistics of the private sector borrowings have reduced. Now, what is the cause for this? We see a stock market which has significant growth over the last few months or so. However, borrowings have reduced. Interest rates are low in the market. What is the cause for this? Is it because investors are scared to invest in Sri Lanka? What is the cause for this?
Well, I think Mr. Jayasundara himself, the Secretary to the Finance, has recently said that he's held the private sector accountable to a lot of things. He has held his officials accountable, saying that all the BOI is doing is giving licenses to spas, and there is no pharmaceuticals, there is no the big IT industry. He's absolutely right. Why? If there is no rule of law, if there is no freedoms, if there is no accountability, if the enforcement regulators turn a blind eye and the rules are not properly governed and there is no equitable treatment, there is corruption, nepotism and waste of such high magnitude as it's understood by those who understand things, I think who wants to come here and invest?
Let's say look at the recent incidents in Aludgam and Bedwala as well, Mr. Jayarath. I recollect many organizations have been very vocal on this, saying that no arrests have been made, there is no democracy in Sri Lanka, the rule of law is not being implemented equitably across the board. What is the cause for all these problems that are taking place in Sri Lanka, and how would a new investor view Sri Lanka when things like this continuously take place in the country?
I would think that the 5 items I mentioned, from rule of law to corruption, those are very important issues to bring new investments in. Secondly, I think very important would be for people to hold everybody accountable. And you can't have a situation where, I mean, we are seeing open things. When somebody is abducted, you have to know a minister who has to intervene to get somebody released. I mean, do you expect people to come here and invest under such circumstances? There are other countries in which to invest. I leave all that out. Why are we talking about big investments without following our best chance? Our best chance is Indians to come here and invest to supply South Indian market, the total South Indian market. SEPA. If the business sector, I would like to ask accountability from all the business chambers. What have you done to change the nature of the thinking, nature of acceptance by the business sector that SEPA is necessary? Indo-Lanka investment and trade is the platform upon which we can grow this country.
This was looked at by the Minister of Foreign Affairs during his recent visit to India as well, Mr. Jayarath. So there are discussions taking place on the SEPA agreement.
It is at the discussion stage. We have been discussing this from the time of Mrs. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga. But I don't think there's a heart in the business people to do this. There are few people who are stopping it. And at the same time, I'll give you one other question. Who would like to invest when there is a bill which says that no foreign company can own any land? And there is now a story that even if a transmission upon death, if you have a child who's abroad and that person has British citizenship, if something happens to you, the property can't go to that person. These are fundamental rights. If such legislation is being thought of even, right, can you expect somebody to come and invest here? You have to guarantee property rights, trademark rights, rights that nobody will come and occupy your premises, that you will not be subjected to blackmail, that the police will not look the other way when your house is affected or your business is affected, or you have to know somebody to give a telephone call and tell them to get some action. Now those are the fundamental things that cover for
the 2/3 majority secured by the government in Parliament. Are they using this for negative reasons or to bring in legislation that they want to create and not what the country wants?
Well, if you take a look at the past, that has been so. To me, the 17th Amendment going away, with whatever the difficulties, that has taken away a lot of independence that has been there. I also believe a third term to the president was rushed through the 18th Amendment, which is wrong. That is one of the fundamental checks and balances in the system of somebody who has accountability but is protected by law from impunity, from charges of impunity in a court. I think these are issues for which we are going to pay for.
The executive presidency, do you think this has to be abolished?
Certainly it should be abolished, but abolished not for the sake of abolishing. Something that will bring equity, equality and true democratic rights and freedoms equivalent to what others enjoy in other countries.
What will happen to Sri Lanka in the coming 6 months Mr. Jayaratna, if it goes like this? Can we achieve targeted growth of 7.5% at the end of the year? Can we achieve that?
I have no doubt we will achieve the 7.5% growth. I'm also certain that all the other statistics that were quoted, like the number of tourists who come here, the number of the per capita growth, all that will be achieved.
So $1 billion was achieved from tourism during the last 6 months alone. Now these are government statistics, Mr. Jayaratna, and you cannot lie about these. Am I right?
Well, I have a different theory. If you look at some of the figures, as some of us who have nothing to do look at figures, you see some things which cannot be explained. In some years it's the exchange rate, in some years it's the number of people. So you have, if you are dividing one by another, if you increase the top and you decrease the bottom, you know this.
Many say, Mr. Jayaratna, let me interrupt you for a second. Many say that you are being very critical of the government over the last few years or so. Is this the reason that you voice your concerns?
I voice my concern because I do not believe that there is effective governance. Not only in the government, I believe that there is no effective governance. I gave you some examples just at the beginning of this interview. I don't think there is good governance even in the private sector, nor in the professional sector. I mean, if engineers who are signing off some contract cannot justify that investment on the basis of professional assessment or estimation, how can they put a signature to a document? Don't these auditors have a right to we have an accounting standard called fair value. Now, if fair value standard is adopted, all the projects which have had bribery or corruption in it must be brought down to its own books the day it enters the balance sheet. Has anybody adjusted in this country? So is there no corruption in this country? I'm thankful to some members of the COPE for at least one state corporation head is to be charged, but when one is charged, I'm sure the hundreds are not. But the basic thing is that's all governance. I'm not against a government. I have no government. To me, I am a bigger critic of the opposition than the government. I think it's the opposition who fails when they do not ask the right questions in Parliament, do not hold them accountable, and do not explain to the people. If anybody can explain to the people, nobody has explained in my books to the people as to the impact of corruption, mega corruption, on the pockets, lives and livelihoods and futures of the common people.
Mr. Jayaratna, the government has decided to merge financial institutions, and this project is dubbed as the Financial Sector Consolidation Program. How do you view this program as the former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce?
The way to view this, I will tell you, and I'll give you my view. The way to view it is the financial sector has so many stakeholders. Firstly, the depositors, the management, the borrowers, the government, the Inland Revenue Department, the international community, the lenders. There are so many. If you tick these, and the shareholders, if you tick the boxes and see, does this make sense? Out of these 8 people, I can find only 2 people gaining the benefits out of it in the long term. So if that 6 people are not getting the benefits, it does not make sense in my assessment.
But there is
so just one minute. Like a marriage, before 2 people get married, they have to be compatible. Some of these people who are marrying under this program are totally incompatible. Now, can you believe totally incompatible people producing growth in a family? That's the same thing that will happen to this the financial consolidation. We are talking of financial consolidation. Bank of Ceylon is wanting their capital adequacy ratio raised again with another government assistance. Some of the banks are lending large amounts to state ventures. UDA, the Water Board, all of them are borrowing from these banks.
But won't there be strong financial stability in the market, at least?
the stability has led to the government's, the so-called stability is lead into one thing. Government's borrowings will come down, the borrowings will appear on the balance sheets of the banks, and maybe there will be some guarantees from the bank. Is that stability? Does that bring stability? Stability comes from good governance, from having right checks and balances, doing the right things for the benefit of all stakeholders. Unfortunately, I don't think this forced marriage is going to return to anybody anything. I'm quite certain that this will be one more disaster. And one more thing I want to say, the auditors who are auditors of these companies are the ones who are doing the consulting to make this kapukama or what marriage brokering for this, or the consulting to find ways and means to fit this thing in. To me, that's conflict of interest. Maybe they are saying they'll bring people from abroad and do this as a separate assignment, and that they have Chinese walls or whatever. But I really think that there has been no accountable explanation before the people. There has been no debate on this. That's the biggest issue. I think people like you should be doing is to create a space, not for few of us, but to bring the common people as well as intellectuals to a space and give them the space, create a forum and give them a space to debate all these issues.
Now, speaking at a recent event in Colombo, Dr. P.B. Jayasundar, who is the Treasury Secretary, said that he is now tasked with making the 2015 budget and requested the private sector not to urge for tax holidays, not to urge for concessions in terms of taxes and so on and so forth. In 2009, just before the war ended, I recollect the president saying that people have to tighten their belts and brace themselves because they want to go for the kill. 5 years following the end of the conflict, a similar statement is being made by the Treasury Secretary. Where are we heading, Mr. Jayaratna?
I think for once I agree totally with the Treasury Secretary. I think we have a low tax regime. We have an effective revenue system, and I think private sector should lay away and do growth. But why the private sector is not doing it, I think comes back again to the state's policy, implementation, and especially the governance. I don't blame, but my problem is, why isn't the private sector getting up and saying that these are the reasons why we cannot bring investors? Why are they saying that inflation is down, exchange rate is stable, all the good things you are saying? But why doesn't therefore people come here and invest and have growth?
6 months from now, when the budget comes into play, where do you want to see the country?
But I think the budget will be, as I think Dr. Jayasundar is one of the cleverest people. I think he's the only man who can tie the loose ends together and take this budget as it is in whatever way he does. Not that
so you are saying he's
if I was sitting in his desk, I might not be doing that, but that's a different matter. But he will produce a good budget. It will look very rosy. But one question I challenge anyone is, start the budget with a statement. If you look at the country, I'm leaving the technical term out. If you take the country's future earnings and all the liabilities it has, if you have to pay some liabilities in the future, you're going to get some future income, and you have some future expenses. If your future income, future expenses reduced to today is less than zero, then you're bankrupt. So if a good budget to me is, if that is the situation, I cannot say, I have hunches, but I cannot say, but Dr. Jayasundar and the central bank can do it, and I've been asking this for a long time. I'm not again bringing the word and confusing there is a theoretical way. American government was charged with this thing one day by saying that somebody got up in the House of Representatives and said so. Let us have the honesty in the next budget to get up and give the real figures, not election-oriented figures or actual things. If you want the people to tighten their belts, if you want people to produce more, if you want people to be more productive, let us have the real truth and let us all join together. I think this country has tremendous resources, tremendous committed people, as we have demonstrated during the war. We can do it. But if you try to show something, have something else, know the difference between what is being presented and the other, then I don't think we will get there. I think the budget should, if one item in the budget is to bring the reality to the books and get people to wake up.
Jayaratnam, 6 months from now, we meet again and we discuss about the budget. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Shamir. All the best to you.